Sunny rays, breaking through the leaves of the old oak, played bunnies on the floor of her room. 10-year-old Alice considered these bunnies her personal messengers from summer. It was already coming to an end, leaving in the air a sweetish taste of loss and excitement before the new school year. But today, on the last Saturday of August, she was thinking only about one thing: about the mysterious attic in her grandmother's house. The house was ancient, smelling of apples, incense, and thyme. Grandmother Marta always said that it had seen more than it might seem. Alice loved this house, but the attic was a special place for her, a forbidden fruit, alluring with its inaccessibility. And today, when grandmother went to the market, leaving Alice under the supervision of the ever-dozing grandfather Ivan, the door to the attic suddenly turned out to be unlocked. A ringing squeak of the iron handle echoed in the silence of the corridor. Alice, holding her breath, opened the heavy door. She was hit by a smell of stale air, dust, and something else, as if the aroma of past centuries. Stairs, resembling a ladder, led into semi-darkness, where sunbeams barely broke through the dirty round window. The air was thick, and every step raised clouds of dust, dancing in the rays of light. Boxes, old magazines, broken furniture, all of this resembled a treasury. Alice carefully made her way through the legacy of the past, touching the cobweb-covered chests with her fingers. She wasn't looking for anything specific, but felt that something was waiting for her. In the very corner, under a white sheet resembling a shroud, she noticed a small wooden box, covered with carvings. The patterns were strange, not flowers or animals, but some tangled lines, resembling an uneven pulse, and a multitude of eyes, which seemed to be watching her from the depths of tea. It was wooden, ancient, with brightly carved facial features. It was neither a human nor an animal face. It was cut by a frozen, unnaturally wide smile stretching from ear to ear. The eyes, simply two deep black holes, seemed like a void that swallows light. Alice was immediately seduced by its bizarre, unhealthy beauty. It was both scary and enchanting at once. Not knowing why, the girl took out the mask. The wood was cold to the touch, like ice, despite the hot air in the attic. She raised it to her face. It smelled of damp forest, rotten wood, and something else metallic, like blood. Returning to her room, Alice looked at the find for a long time. The voice of reason, similar to her mother's voice, whispered that it was better to put it back. But curiosity turned out to be stronger. Approaching the mirror, she, smiling, applied the mask to her face. There were no hidden straps, but it strangely stuck to her skin, as if alive. The cold spread over her face and then disappeared. At first, nothing changed. She saw her reflection in the mirror, a little girl with brown eyes and disheveled hair, from under which the wooden mask peeked out. Then she looked into the eternal voids of the mosque's eye sockets. The world went from under her feet. It wasn't fainting. It was like falling into cold, black water. She wasn't breathing, couldn't hear, couldn't feel her body. Only the abyss. And then, suddenly, she was thrown back. She was again standing in the room, looking in the mirror. But now everything around had changed. The colors had become paler, as if faded, the air had taken on a grayish tint. But the most terrible thing was not this. She saw her reflection. Her own eyes, which she had known all her life, were now two small, shiny points trembling in the endless blackness of the mosque's void. And from the wide wooden smile on her own lips hung a thin, barely noticeable thread of saliva. She tried to scream, but only produced a hoarse, hissing air. Alice tore the mask from her face with force. It seemed the skin was tearing off with it, such was the pain. She gasped wildly, throwing the cursed thing on the bed. She looked at her hands, they were ordinary. She ran to the mirror. Her face was her face, only pale and frightened. The eyes were her eyes. It was a hallucination, a result of the heat and dust, she decided. But the feeling of cold void inside her did not pass. Letting out the air, she left the room, trying to distract herself. In the living room on the sofa, as always, dozed grandfather Ivan. He smiled at her when she entered. "What, puppy?" searched the attic. His voice was hoarse from age and tobacco. Alice nodded, trying to hide the trembling. She wanted to tell, but something stopped her. She looked at her grandfather, and suddenly something happened. The air around him seemed to thicken, to tremble. For a moment, his kind, wrinkled features floated, as if dissolving in the air. It was a large, raw creature. Its skin, gray and pockmarked with warts, breathed heat. Long, thin arms with claws, similar to glass, lay on its knees. From under heavy eyelids shone small, pig-like eyes, full of boredom and ancient evil. And from the mouth, full of curved, yellow fangs, hung a long, pink tongue, and this creature was licking itself with it, looking at Alice. This was not her grandfather. This was something that wore his skin, sat on his sofa, imitated his voice. Alice stepped back, biting her lip so as not to scream. The creature grandfather was saying something to her, but she didn't hear the words. She only heard a low, hoarse wheezing, similar to the rustling of boards in an old house. She slowly, without taking her eyes off the monster, left the living room. Her heart was beating so hard it was about to jump out of her chest. The mask, it went through her head. It allows you to see the truth. She ran to the kitchen, where her mother should have been. Mom had always been her salvation, her rock. She was standing by the sink washing dishes. A sunbeam played in her chestnut hair. "Mom!" exclaimed Alice, rushing to her. Mother turned around. Her face was kind, ordinary. Alice felt a wave of relief. But then she saw what was behind that face. Her mother was not ugly, like that creature in the living room. She was empty. Where her warm, bright spirit should have been, there was only an amoeba-like, transparent creature, without form, without color. It was like a large jellyfish that had taken the form of a human. This creature did not think, did not feel. It just moved, imitated behavior, performed programmed actions. Its eyes were just two glass beads reflecting the world, but not emitting it. "What happened, dear?" Alice heard the voice. But the voice was flat, without emotional depth, like a recording on poor quality tape. Alice couldn't speak. She looked at this void in the image of her mother, and her world was crumbling before her eyes. Her family, her love, her safety, all of it was a lie, a script played out by monsters and voids. She ran out into the street, hoping to find salvation in the familiar world. But it was even worse there. Neighbors she had known all her life, children she played football with yesterday, all of them were different. A crowd of masks, under which the most varied horrors were hidden. Here is Mr. Jones, watering the lawn, turned out to be a tall, thin creature with a long neck and a head resembling a skull, covered in dry, scaly skin. He slowly turned his head 360 degrees, as if searching for a victim. And next to him his wife, an ordinary fat woman, was actually like a huge caterpillar with many crooked, short legs hiding under her dress. Her head was small, with headless tentacles instead of hair. The children playing on the lawn were the most terrifying. They were not creatures, they were a zone. Their forms floated, merged with each other. They had too many limbs, too many eyes scattered all over their bodies. They weren't laughing, but making sharp, clicking sounds. And one boy, who usually played ball, was sitting apart, and Alice saw how thin, spider-like legs were growing from his back, desperately trying to break through his t-shirt. Alice ran, not understanding where. She was surrounded by a nightmare that no one but her could see. She saw the true faces of monsters disguised as people, and all of them played their roles, lived their ordinary lives, as if nothing had happened. They were perfect imitators, and that was the most terrifying thing, the normality that hid hell behind itself. She fell on a bench in the old park, covering her face with her hands. Tears flowed like a river, but she didn't even feel them. What to do? Who to tell? Suddenly she felt a gaze on her, sharp, like a razor. She raised her eyes. A man was standing on the path. He was tall, in an office suit, with a briefcase. In appearance, an ordinary businessman. But Alice saw his true face. It was not an animal and not a void. It was a human, a completely normal human. But his eyes, they were full of intelligence and awareness. He wasn't imitating, he really was who he seemed to be. But he was looking at her not like everyone else. He was looking at her with curiosity, with understanding. He saw that she could see. He did not smile, only holding her gaze. He slowly raised a finger to his lips in a gesture that meant silence. Then he turned and left, dissolving among the crowd of monsters. Who was that? An ally? Another one who could see? Or an overseer? Alice understood the main thing. She must not trust anyone. Returning home, she locked herself in her room. It was getting dark. The house was immersed in silence, but now this silence was tense and hostile. She heard the mother void muttering something in the kitchen, and her voice was like the buzzing of an insect. She heard the grandfather monster moving heavily around the living room, its claws clicking on the parquet. She lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling. The cursed mask lay nearby, on the nightstand. Its wooden smile now seemed sinister. She cursed the moment she found it. But along with the curse came understanding. She could not go back. Ignorance was bliss, but now, knowing the truth, she could not pretend that nothing had happened. A crazy idea occurred to her. What if she put the mask on again? Maybe she could somehow control this gift? Maybe she would understand more? It was like suicide, but the fear of ignorance had become stronger than the fear of knowledge. Taking the mask in her hands, she again felt its cold. This time there was no fall. Instead, there was a jolt. As if her brain was connected to billions of channels, each broadcasting horror. She didn't just see the true faces. She heard their thoughts. Not words, but primal impulses. Living room. The monster grandfather. His thoughts were a low rumble. Hunger. Hunting. Old. Weak. Can eat? No. Violation of camouflage. Rules. Wait. Kitchen. The void mother. Its thoughts were static, white noise, sometimes broken by automatic commands. Cook. Wash. Sleep. Imitate. Alice left the room. Now she saw the world through a double filter, normal vision and the terrible reality, superimposed on each other. She went to her grandmother's library. The monster grandfather followed her with his piggy eyes, but did not move from his spot. He thought, interesting, not afraid? In the library, she found old books on mythology and the occult. She didn't know what she was looking for, but her hands themselves flipped through the yellowed pages. And suddenly she found it. A drawing, similar, very similar to her mask. The inscription was incomprehensible, in Latin, but she made out the word, larva. Larva. She ran with the book to the computer. Googling was scary. What if someone was watching? But there was no choice. She found out. Larva, among the ancient Romans, evil spirits, ghosts of the dead. But in more esoteric sources, it was something else. Creatures from the subtle world, parasites that have no form of their own. They live among people, feeding on their emotions, energy, and life forces. They wear masks, not wooden ones, but social ones, created from mimicry and illusions. They are an empty shell trying to become someone by stealing the lives of others. Alice understood. She saw a larva. Most people around her were precisely them. Empty creatures playing the roles of friends, relatives, and neighbors. But there were others, like that monster grandfather. A different species? More ancient? More aggressive? The books were silent about that. And what was the mask then? A window? A tool? Or bait? Days passed. Alice learned to live with her knowledge. She learned not to look too intently, not to react to the horror that surrounded her. She played her role, the role of a child preparing for school. She laughed with the mother, told the grandfather about her affairs. But inside she was freezing. She saw how the mother void fed the flowers, and saw how a black, sticky energy oozed from her fingers, causing the flowers to wither before her eyes. She saw how the grandfather monster looked at the birds outside the window, and his thoughts were filled with images of tearing them to pieces. The first day of school arrived. For Alice, it was like being thrown into a cage with predators. Her class was a zoo of horrors. The teacher, Mrs. Eepleton, usually a kind woman, turned out to be a long-haired, pale creature with empty eye sockets from which black fluid continuously flowed, dissolving in the air before reaching the floor. She taught, and her thoughts were full of disgust for the children, whom she called juicy worms. The child larvae were even worse. They had no constant form. Their true appearances floated, changed depending on their emotions. When one of them got angry, Alice saw how thorns and blades grew from it. When someone was happy, the creature swelled up like a balloon, about to burst with something disgusting. And one boy sitting at the same desk with her was entwined with tentacles that constantly moved, feeling everything around, including her. Alice tried to be invisible, but once during recess she witnessed something that made her blood run cold. Two high school boys, ordinary guys, were joking with each other. But Alice saw their larvae. One was like a festering wound on legs, the other, like a cluster of insects constantly crawling over each other. Suddenly they quarreled, the jokes turned into anger, and Alice saw how their true forms began to go out of control. The wound began to pulsate and ooze, and the insects buzzed and thickened menacingly. The surrounding larva children turned their attention to them. Their gazes became hungry. They began to gather around, like a school of piranhas. Alice couldn't stand it. She didn't want anyone to get hurt, even if they weren't real people. "Stop!" she shouted. All eyes, both human and true, turned to her. Silence fell. The two high school boys, distracted, calmed down. But now all the larvae were looking at Alice. From that day on, everything changed. Alice felt constant pressure. Gazes followed her everywhere. Her larva classmates began to behave more cautiously with her, but in their thoughts she now read curiosity, excitement, and something like hunger. They began to test her. They threw a dead rat into her backpack. She saw how the larva boy who did it radiated pleasure, similar to the chirping of a cricket. They whispered something behind her back, but when she turned around, she saw only their human masks smiling nastily. Once she got lost in the school after lessons. The corridors were empty, only distant footsteps buzzed like mosquitoes. She turned a corner and saw Mrs. Eepleton. The teacher was standing with her back to her, but Alice saw her true form. That pale, long-haired ghost. And it wasn't standing still. Its long, bony fingers, like sticks, slid along the wall, leaving behind traces of a black, sticky substance. It was drawing something. Alice looked closer. It was a symbol. Alice stepped back, trying not to make a sound. But the floor creaked. The creature of Mrs. Eepleton turned sharply. Its empty eye sockets stared at Alice. The black fluid began to flow faster, like tears. In Alice's mind, not a voice sounded, but a sensation, cold and slippery, like the touch of a dead man. "You see. You see." Alice rushed to run. She ran without looking back, feeling that gaze seeping through the walls, following her. She understood, they know, or are beginning to suspect. That night she had a dream. She was standing in the center of a large city. A million-strong crowd was swarming around her, and suddenly they all simultaneously removed their masks. Human faces floated away, and from under them peered an ocean of horrors, scrawls, voids, insect-like creatures, slugs, shadows. All of them were looking at her, and millions of voices, millions of thoughts pierced her mind with a single word: look. She woke up in a cold sweat. The room was dark, but she was not alone. A figure was standing by her bed. It was the mother. The void. It just stood and looked at her with its glass bead eyes. It did not move. It just observed. Alice screamed. She turned on the light. The figure disappeared, but the feeling of presence remained. They were watching her. They were studying her. It was time to act. She could no longer live like this. She remembered the man in the park. The one who showed silence. He was the only one who was not a larva or a monster. He could help. Alice decided to find him. She started going to the park every day after school. She sat on the same bench, observing the crowd of monsters passing by. She was looking for normal human eyes in a sea of horrors. A week passed. He was not there. Alice began to despair, and meanwhile, the pressure from the larvae intensified. They became bolder. And then, one day, when she was about to go home, he appeared. The same man. He was in the same suit, with the same briefcase. He sat on the bench next to her, not looking at her. "You are looking for me," he said quietly. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. Alice nodded, unable to utter a word. "I knew you would come," he said. "They always come." He finally looked at her. His eyes were old, very old, and full of the same pain as hers. What is this?" she whispered. "The truth," he replied simply. "Most people are just larvae, empty creatures living at the expense of others. They are like the white blood cells of the universe, but evil. They maintain the status quo, absorbing everything extraordinary, everything real. Some of them are older, stronger. Those you call monsters. They can hunt. And the mask? A key," said the man. "One of many. It opens the veil. Always someone is found who finds it. A child. Because children are more open, more receptive. How to remove it? How to get rid of this gift?" The man smiled sadly. "It is not a gift, child. It is a curse, and it cannot be removed. You can never forget what you have seen. You can only learn to live with it. Or what? Or become one of them. They will offer it to you. They always offer. Who are you?" "I am the same as you. One who sees. We call ourselves observers. There are few of us. We are scattered all over the world. We try to study them, understand their rules, and survive. Do they want me? You are an anomaly. You violate their order. You are not a mask, you are real. And you see, that makes you dangerous. First they will observe, then they will try to either break or absorb you. What should I do? Hide. Play your role better than them. Do not show that you see. Do not interfere. You must become nothing to them. A void among voids. That is the only way to survive." He stood up to leave. "Wait, how can I find you again?" "You won't. I will find you when needed. If you survive." He left, leaving Alice alone with a new, even deeper horror. Observers. Survival. Playing a role. She realized that her life had turned into one big game of hide and seek, where defeat would be death or a worse fate. She returned home with a new determination. She had to become the best actress in the world. She began to carefully practice her role. She laughed with a friend, Larva, who tried to scare her. She told the mother, Void, about her problems at school, imitating emotions she did not feel. She even asked the grandfather, Monster, to help her with her homework, sitting next to him and feeling how his ancient anger radiated a cold that pierced to the bones. It worked. The pressure gradually decreased. The gazes that followed her became rarer. They began to accept her as their own. They saw only the mask she had put on, the mask of a normal, happy child. They did not see what was happening inside. They did not see how she cried into her pillow every night, how her own face in the mirror now seemed to her a foreign mask. She was losing herself to save her shell. A month passed. Alice learned to live in two worlds simultaneously. The outer one, the world of masks, and the inner one, the world of terrible truth. She even found a defense mechanism for herself. She started keeping a diary. But not an ordinary one. She drew in it what she saw. The monster grandfather, the void mother, the larva at school. It was the only way to preserve her mind, the only place where she could be herself. One evening she was sitting in her room drawing the symbol she had seen on Mrs. Eppleton. She was trying to understand it. Suddenly she felt a presence. She raised her eyes. In the window of her room, on the second floor, stood the same man. The observer. His face was pale, his eyes wide with horror. He was shouting something to her, but through the glass she couldn't hear. He was pointing his finger at something in her room. Alice turned around. Behind her back, on the bed, lay the mask. But now it was not just wooden. It was breathing. Its wooden lips were moving, as if trying to say something. And from the empty eye sockets, black smoke began to ooze. Alice retreated to the window, but the man was already gone. She was left alone with the awakened mask. Smoke filled the room, covering the ceiling, forming figures. They were shadows, similar to larvae, but denser, more real. They moved around the room, their empty eyes directed at her. She understood. The mask was never a tool. It was bait, a transmitter, a signal. It attracted the attention not just of larvae, but of something stronger. Something that lived in the same void as the larva, but was their source, their god. The door to her room opened. On the threshold stood the mother and the grandfather. But now they were not separate creatures. The black smoke from the mask enveloped them, connecting them into a single giant, monstrous form. Their human masks completely dissolved, showing their true essence, void and beast. evil in a single entity, controlled by a single will. Look, a voice sounded in her head. It was not a single voice, but the grinding of millions of creatures speaking simultaneously. You wanted to see? See. This is who we are. This is who the world is. Alice pressed her back against the window. Escape was impossible. The smoky shadows surrounded her. She saw the real world. And it was the end. And suddenly her gaze fell on the diary lying open on the table. On the drawing of the symbol. Tangled lines. Eyes. And suddenly she understood. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a map. A map of their world, of their mind. And every line, every point had meaning. It was instinct, a last attempt to save herself. She grabbed a pencil and on the drawing, right in the center of the symbol, drew a single line. A line that cut through all the tangles, that passed through all the eyes. A line of severance. An explosion of silence occurred. The black smoke froze and then began to dissipate. The shadows swayed and dissolved. The monster on the threshold roared in pain and fury, splitting into two parts. The mother and the grandfather, who helplessly fell to the floor. The wooden mask on the bed cracked in half with a crack. Everything went quiet. Alice stood, breathing heavily. The room was only chaos and the smell of incense. She approached the split mask. It was dead, just a piece of wood. She looked out the window. The world outside was the same. Grayish, faded. The monsters were still there. But something had changed. They were no longer looking at her house. They were looking through her, as if she had become invisible. The line she had drawn had not destroyed them. It had severed her from them. She had become nothing to them. A true void. She went downstairs. The mother and the grandfather were unconscious. After a while, they woke up. They were back in their masks, the kind mother, the sleepy grandfather. They remembered nothing. For them, Alice was an ordinary granddaughter. Alice went to school the next day. Mrs. Eepleton was an ordinary teacher. Classmates were ordinary children. They no longer saw anything special in her. She had succeeded. She had become a perfect mask. But at night, when she closed her eyes, she saw the true faces. She heard the grinding of millions of voices. She knew the truth, and she knew that this truth was waiting for her to weaken, for her own mask to crack. And then they would notice her again. She had survived, but her victory was a defeat. She had saved her body but lost her soul. She was a child who had seen too much, and now her life had become an eternal game of hide and seek with her own horror. And the game had only just begun.